All right, so 1, 2, 3, we have a quorum. So we're gonna call the Policy and Personnel Item Committee meeting to order. The first item before us is, if you guys will remember, and it was back in September, this was brought forward. I wasn't actually at the meeting where the issue occurred, and based on members wanting to call in and Natalie's brilliant keeping us from getting into trouble, thought we should create a policy. We had that conversation. It never went anywhere. It's my job to either pull these things off of the to-do list or move them forward. So this
Motion
is
to approve policy BEDM.
Second.
as written.
Yes.
And any discussion?
No.
Yes.
We're on policy BEDM. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Is that on communications?
Yes.
Yes.
Reverend Collins.
So this is, so basically, to make sure I understand, I guess we'd be calling first and get 24 hours in advance to get permission to do a telephone calling or a video. 24 hours calling, right?
By notice, yes.
Yeah, right.
And then your reason for calling in got to be acceptable to somebody. It doesn't say who has to prove the reason. The reason, who doesn't say who has to approve the reason you're calling in.
Pull it out and show me the language.
All right.
The exceptional circumstances that would prevent in-person participation.
Well, I know what it says.
Medical emergencies, military service, job restraints, and/or travel situations.
I said, hold on one second, let me show you what I'm getting at.
Well, that's what you're getting at.
It doesn't tell us who will determine whether the reasoning is acceptable or not. Who's in charge of that? Who it is? It's me, it's Cindy, okay? Chris explained that. So, but if it's you, Kate, we don't know who will make that determination whether the reason is acceptable or not. You might say, well, you only got a scratch on your foot. You got to go to the doctor for that today. You still could have come in. Or you don't come up, or you missed it for a toothache, or you had a headache, or your sister was ill. It doesn't say who determines
Well, it doesn't.
who approves the reason. Who approves the reason?
No, it doesn't. And what I was saying when we called the meeting together is, this has been sitting since September. I've done no work with it. The board hasn't requested any work with it. So we either need to get it off the to-do list and kill it, or create something and move forward. So
let me say this then.
So bring any ideas to the table.
All right, so what happened, the last time this was presented to the table, the board, I think the board didn't approve it. And that's been less than 6 months ago.
It never came out of committee, so the policy you're referencing, we're in a limbo. If y'all want it to go, if you want it to go away, tell me to make it go away, and I don't have to keep bringing it back.
So you're telling me this is not the same policy that we?
I'm telling you that you tabled it.
Right.
Natalie brought this back to me, and we didn't vote it down, and Natalie brought it back and said, this has been sitting here, what do we do with it? And I said, what we do is we ask the board what they want to have happen. Do you want to vote it down? Do you want to move it forward?
So you're saying the board voted to table it before?
Yeah, the meeting minutes are available.
So I like to table it again then.
All right, well, we have a motion to approve it. So to answer your question, the way I would read this is, if you 24 hours ahead of time send notice and say, I've got a medical emergency, my toe's broken, whatever it might be, there's not an interpretation of that. The reasons are for exceptional circumstances. It shouldn't just be, hey, I don't want to come to the meeting today. That's not an acceptable circumstance. But if it meets one of these reasons why you can't, there's nobody saying yes or no.
So what the point I'm getting at is what we're making is we're making a policy that doesn't say who enforces that policy. In other words, it needs to identify the group or the person that identifies and enforces the policy. We just can't have a policy on the books, and then no one really understands the spirit of it.
Right at this point, Reverend Collins, we have a motion and a second. I'm waiting on you to tell me what you want it to say, so we can see if the two people making the motion want to change, want to add that.
I want it to go away. I want to go away.
Okay.
It hadn't been 6 months yet. I think it's breaking the 6 month policy rule. It's sitting me back on the table for 6 months.
I appreciate your opinion, but I researched the policy and I don't believe that.
Okay, that's fine.
So,
question.
okay, so then the motion is to approve first reading of policy BEDM. Kevin? Stobbs?
No.
Garrett?
Yes.
Collins?
No.
Mack?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
And I vote yes, and that means the motion does not move forward.
Okay.
All right.
Ms. Davis.
6 people, 3-3 means that the motion fails.
Because Kate, count Kate yourself.
Oh, I left Kate off.
Yeah.
Kid is not a person.
Okay, so the motion
Don't just tease
passes,
on that.
so it goes to the board for consideration.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
The next item before us is the first reading of some revisions to policy JFAB that has been revised. Is there a motion or any discussion?
Second.
We have a motion to approve in a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Kevin? Stobbs?
Come back to me a second.
Garrett?
Yes.
Collins?
I'm not really sure I understand this one, to be honest with you.
Oh, this is the form. Okay, I got it now. Good.
Okay, do you want to go, I asked if there was any discussion, and there's not
Right.
any, so we're in the middle of voting, so how do you vote?
Legislative
this is the one we talked about
legislative
before.
priorities?
Huh?
Legislative priorities?
Well, non-resident students.
This is the one that
This came up at the Baptist Hill.
Reverend Mack, how do you vote? Priscilla, do you want to cast a vote on policy JFAB first
Oh,
reading?
that's good, mixed up, must be. Oh, I'm sorry, it's in my hand, I got it.
Okay.
I grabbed too many
Kate?
at one time.
Yes.
And I'm yes.
And Stobbs is yes. And I vote yes. Reverend Collins, would you like to cast a vote?
Yeah, I think so. I think I vote yes. I think I vote yes.
Okay, that motion carries unanimously and can go to potential consent for the, is this on today's agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
Then it can go to potential consent per policy because it's a unanimous vote. The next item before us is the legislative priorities. We need to discuss what we want our priorities and legislative discussions to be for the 2018 session.
There was a list of priorities I would
There
just
are-
say, are there any changes to them, or we can find
Right,
them?
what I asked is that this list be presented as our, as suggestions to see what the board's will was.
It says Act 388, board compensation, Laura Brown Scholarship Fund, state-owned buses, and hearing office certification. Anything else?
When you say hang out, you mean, at the board,
Remember they're requiring them to be mediators? Or
yeah.
Oh, yeah, because that kept make it a broader certification.
Right, it's limiting
Eligible to be able
the
to.
diversity of the group.
Right, because there weren't that many African-American
Yeah.
attorneys who are also mediators, so we
I
thought that was an unfair rule.
realize it's either law, that's some type of reference, whereas a teacher has an option, whether she wants to be heard by the board or hearing officer. I like to see that, then she has the option, especially if she's worked in district a long time, many years.
What if it's a he?
I
He
was
or
gonna
she.
say.
I don't mean teacher that's working maybe 3 years or 4 years, but someone who worked 10 years, 15, 20 years, I think they deserve to have the option to
So
go for the
Reverend
board.
Collins is asking that we put on our legislative priority that we ask the legislation
Can we do
to,
that? I mean,
We can actually, yeah.
can we have our own? Or?
Yeah.
okay, stop. Does
I
everybody
vote
know?
no on that.
I know what he's asking, and I would disagree with it because the whole purpose of having hearing officers was to avoid the situation where people ask for the appeals, we get bogged down with everything, they don't get heard, they get paid for years at a time and time and time, and they never get any resolution. So I'd rather it just be heard by a hearing officer with appeal to us or whatever it may be, or or at least we bless it.
May I
Moves
may I
on.
respond, Cindy?
Michael has got you had a question?
Yeah, I've never voted to support having us using a hearing officer for teacher appeals, number one.
Right.
Number two, I don't know if Chris is asking that we ask the legislative body to do this, or are you saying within our own policy that a teacher have that as an option?
And I'll respond to that because the law that is in your policy says that the board must make a decision
Either or, right?
prior to the year and then stick to it so you're not shopping back and forth. So it's not that I don't agree or disagree with it being a policy, it's that the law says he can't do what he wants to do, so we would have to ask the legislation to review it.
Okay.
The language is we have to select whether we're going to use hearing officers or not,
For the year.
and then go to it. So Reverend Collins is asking that we add as a priority that we ask the legislation to amend this law to allow the staff person to decide if they want to hear it by a board or an arbitrator. Reverend Mack?
So I know we're not seeking to determine whether or not we want to use hearing officers. But since the discussion has come up twice, I do have some concerns about using hearing officers. Just to the simple fact of just not physically being present in the actual hearing. We received the documentation. We get all of the written detail as to what transpired, but there are always some key components when you're physically listening to, and then there are pertinent questions that can be asked, that's not asked, that helps, give you a better picture of what actually took place and what transpired. So I have some great concerns.
So I can answer your concerns. They don't exist in legislation. The way the law is written is that we decide. They never said that boards must use, so your issue doesn't require anything to do with legislative delegation. It is something that the board, you could bring forward for the board to consider.
Right, that's what I just said.
Right, so get the people and put it, or get with whoever the policy person is going to be, and let's get that on there. But today, the question that Reverend Collins is bringing is directly related to having to ask the legislature to consider. So Reverend Collins wants to add to the list of legislative priorities that the law be amended to allow to have the staff person decide if they want the board or the hearing officer to hear it. Is that what you're asking, Reverend Collins?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a second to adding that to the legislative delegation listing?
I'd like to second that if we don't have the support for us going away from a hearing officer altogether. So if the will of the board is to have us have a hearing officer, then I would support Reverend Collins's attempt to give teachers the option.
I can't predict how the board's going to vote in
Right,
September.
That's right.
So you're looking at me and I'm like, I have no idea.
I'm looking at you because you called me to speak.
So let's assume that you're seconding that just because you'd rather have it as an option than not on the table.
Right.
But this is not an action item, though.
Not really, is it?
I thought it was action on, I am so sorry, guys. I
Read
thought
what's
we had
presented.
say on this.
First information. Well, we got information. We got some good information.
Right. Okay, so is there any other, Reverend Collins?
Yeah, I want to address.
I apologize,
Mr.
Bob,
Stobbs.
Yes.
What you said a little while ago, and which I respect your opinion on a lot of things.
Yep.
But I've been in a lot of teacher appeals. And Chris, what you get on writing is not the spirit of what took place in most cases.
Okay.
You'll be amazed how far is different you hear from the other side. And the hearing officer, and when we get a 30-minute preview. Can I finish, please?
We have 15 minutes.
I know, but please. I only need about a minute, please.
All right, go. You have 1 minute. You have 1 minute to, well, this is information. Right.
Yeah. So anyway, when we sit down and actually hear the stories, they're so different than what you could actually get on paper.
Because,
to find out
the
what actually
lawyers
took
would
place.
tell you
In
the
fact, Kate
accuracy.
had one when they wanted to fire a guidance counselor for not being actually in the exact room the whole time. But the person she was right next door assigned to sign it to her assistant to do an interview, and they wanted to fire the person for the reason. It was just silly. But on paper, they had destroyed the person. But I stopped there. So you get the benefit of knowing the whole story if you had the time to know it.
No, I appreciate that. My whole desire is to get
Really?
it done
I know,
quickly.
yeah.
Legally,
and get it done. 'Cause
professionally.
The next
Yeah.
step is these folks will have the opportunity to appeal to a circuit court. If they want to sue the district,
Right.
this is kind of a prerequisite to suing the district.
Cindy, why is the time only 30 minutes so that they can present? and to us, said, well, why is the time limit, that time constraint?
What
They
are you
only have
talking
30
about?
That's not on
On
the
the appeal,
agenda
when they do
today.
the, when they do the appeals, after go to the hearing officer.
That is,
was asking.
really,
would
all that's
someone
for
please
September
provide for
conversation.
us in the Friday update, the statute for teacher appeal hearings?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
if there are questions that are generated from
And I'm sorry
that,
if
we
I'm
can go
sorry
from
if I'm
there.
disturbing someone.
That's
The
not-
Sure,
items,
not on the agenda.
guys, the
Okay.
items going to potential consent
Thank you.
are,
JFAB.
JFAB, and then policy BEDM is moving forward to this afternoon's meeting for first reading.
Michael, while you were out, we were talking about consent for the last group as well. Do you want to have a
I'm done, my meeting's
discussion
adjourned.
on SEC on that one issue that you voted no on, the strategic plan? Or should we lump it in with consent?
I mean, you can still do consent. I mean, my votes will still stand, but I mean,
Right,
obviously,
his vote will be
Understand.
recorded.
it's just,
So I make a motion that we
as long as my vote
move,
is.
what did we have for consent?
I got it.
And then add whatever the SEC was.
You got it, Kate?
So we're going to adjourn the meeting to clarify policy BEDM is on tonight's agenda and will be on a regular agenda, and policy JFAB is on tonight's agenda and will be under potential consent. This meeting is adjourned.